Just in your mind, Steve, the 2 sessions,
Yeah.
are they separate topics or are they related? And if so, what's the link?
The link, well, I'm saying here's where I think the first one, here's the framework of where the world is, I think. And the second one is, how is the church navigating the space? I think we can out-purpose, out-relate, and I didn't, I could take 3 sessions, one on each of those, out-purpose, out-relate, and out-last, which I do if I do them at length, but I'm trying to give a flyover of it. Shameless plug, if you want me to do any more, I can come to your church, or I can do some online stuff with your leadership, which I'll give you some information about that, send it via Gav. For next year, I suppose, booking stuff in. It feels like the year suddenly collapses into the months ending in Burr, and here we are. Yeah.
With the challenges that are sort of coming down the line, what's your thought? Like, as you talk about churches that are geared for the future, how would you see churches when approaching key issues? So, for example, singleness is going to be an issue; it's an unprecedented one. The church could either respond to that by just adapting to that reality. So you add a whole bunch of programs that sort of compensate for the fact that people don't have a lot of connection with community, or they could resist it and actually go the way.
Everyone needs to get married now.
Yeah. Helping people to actually get married.
Yeah, which doesn't sound like an awful thing to have to do.
But they're different approaches. So one is the approach of like, the church needs to do more for singles, or we need to change church life for this unprecedented reality. Or it goes the other way, where church life actually is not shifting dramatically, but you are helping people to move towards what the natural means of community, which is the family. What are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on that?
On which of those 2 directions the church?
Start the car. I've seen a lot of heat. Well, Danny Truex just came out with a book on single ever after. Right. Should be worth a read. Danny's reacting to, at one level, the get married, be a trad wife, where's your son being mixer kind of life, if I had 2 options for church every week, as in like I could only do 2 things in church, the government said, right, we'll permit you to do what you want, but you can do 1 thing on Sunday and 1 thing during the rest of the week. I would do church on Sunday that went for quite some time, which had food afterward, and I would just have mixed groups of people meeting once a week in a household over food and a bit of Bible and prayer. That's all I would do. I don't think what my experience at the Crowded House in England, for all of its woes, had some benefits, which was it put people in the same groups who wouldn't naturally be in the same groups. It just said, let's just do family life together as Christians. So we don't need a singles group necessarily. Those single people can go out with each other and hang out. But we're just going to model what family life looks like. But this whole thing of where it's too busy, if you said, okay, as Christian families who've got our life together and our kids are fairly stable and we're going to have a meal together once every month, but we're going to not just invite people like us into that group. We're going to say, oh, there's some single people, there's an older widow, there's a young bloke, there's someone else, and they're part of our family, they're part of our meal time. Because the older person might have some wisdom for us, and the young person can see what a family sitting around a meal table looks like, rather than in front of a screen. And we're just going to do, it almost feels like remedial work. And I would say that. We are doing remedial work in a culture that's very broken. And the first step is just to normalize community life together, where people from different backgrounds naturally get together and spend time with each other. So, and that's where you're going to say, is there a young man who can be not formally discipled by an older bloke who's married, but can be, and just models, who's godly enough to say here to the young man, when I was dating, this is how it went. Or it just feels like those are things we don't need to program. But we're very busy, so we want everything programmed, so we slot into it. Part of it is going to be dialing down the busyness in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, all you've got to do is narrow cast everyone into the singles group, the youth group, and there's nothing wrong with youth group, but once it starts to chunk out energy and time at a level that I don't think is commensurate to what it's giving back, then you need to start asking some questions. How you do life together among disparate groups of people is what I think Christianity needs to figure out in the West. How to do it better anyway, or in a way that's meaningful and rich. Because we're so pulled in so many different directions. And maybe modern Westerners can't do it anymore because we're not willing to give up the 20 activities. Maybe God will bypass us. Yes, I know what the solution is, God. I need to dial down my franticness, but I'm not prepared to do that because my son may not get into Harvard. My son's not going to get into Harvard. I just thought we'd go there, so it was a safe one for me to use. Yeah.
Maybe could you just share a little bit about your experience or some wisdom into church size as well as the nature of community and
church size.
considering that, like, you know, we have limited energy and people and all of those things. So.
I think people say, oh, big churches don't do community very. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think good structure is going to be important. And church, I don't mind big church. And it's going to need stuff to run. It's going to need to run. But people, it would be interesting to see what big church looked like that dialed down the number of programs it does. Because the first thing people do is, okay, what's on for us? They're coming, what have you got? And you go, well, we've got church on Sunday and we've got meals together once a week. What about youth group? What about this? What about that? Oh, and then you start to feel, oh, maybe we need to do that. Oh, we'll send them to we'll go to another church. You go, it's hard to figure it out. I don't think there's a size dynamic necessarily. I assume most of us in the room aren't struggling with figuring out where we put our 2,000 people every Sunday at this stage. But I don't have a problem with the church size either way. But part of it's expectation. I got a French evangelical friend, as in he lives in France. He's an evangelical. There are very few of them. You may have noticed. He teaches English literature at a university. He's married to a Perth girl, but they live in France. And he's like, yeah. Well, I mean, he's French. He's going to say that anyway, right? So, but what I meant was, he goes, there's 65 of us in church. I have to help out with the preaching. But we just do church on Sunday and we spend time together having meals. And that's all we can do. And we're never going to think that we're going to get someone in politics or someone's going to get in the local government that's going to give us what we want. This is France. It doesn't work that way. I said, but he doesn't seem miserable. And I think part of it is expectation. Where C.S. Lewis who's saying you go into a room and you're told it's a hotel, and you go in and there's a window, a bed, and a desk and a chair. This is a terrible hotel. But you're told you're going into a prison and there's a window, and a desk, and a bed, and a chair. You go, this is great. And part of it's our expectations that we've grown up with. What's going to happen to the generation that doesn't have as much money? We're still living on the capital of baby boomer church and the generation before it. All your buildings are. Providence has 900 people, nearly 1,000, doesn't have a building, can't get one. What's going to happen when the school says you can't meet there? We've got all these issues happening. So church size dynamic isn't as important. I do think the leadership sets the tone of your church. What you preach and how you preach is going to set the tone of your church significantly. Just is. Whether it's big or small. And how you warm people with the gospel to want to serve others because they can see there's something greater. And I don't mean great church, I mean an age to come. It's St. Peter, isn't it? We left everything for you, Jesus. Oh, really? Says Jesus. Lands, sisters, brothers, and in the age to come, eternal life. Well, why in Sydney would you, if you're a Christian in Sydney, you think, I could have the good life or I could have Jesus? Because why? It's like the taco shell girl. Why can't it be both, right? And it's alluring. And somehow you just got to peel off the glasses and look at it again. Go, this is the stuff that doesn't last. Maybe because I'm nearly 60, I start to realise that more. This doesn't last. I'm not going to last. And that's part of, our preaching is going to soften people's hearts and change them as well. I wish I had lots of structural things that I could tell you to do, but I'm not quite there yet.
I guess in a similar vein, where does filling a Christian's life with church programs and all these sorts of things, I almost like to think of it as almost like building the kingdom small K in your church community rather than building the kingdom big K, just in terms of using people's time, energy, all these things to make sure church is big and flashy and sounds great, and then you hate your life because you're busy all the time. What's the dynamic moving forward?
Yeah, look, I think people press for time. What you've noticed in church especially is that people will pay for people to do ministry now rather than they'll outsource the payment of it. So the question I have is, can church pitch a vision of what gospel life looks like to its people and send them out on Monday to Friday and just trust that they will live godly lives and know how to do work meaningfully and equip them to do that? Because I think most non-Christians go, if I become a Christian, life will get busier. And I worry a little bit about that. So dialing down how busy church is complex, because you start a small group. You go, this is our new church plant. It's fantastic. We're just having meals together. We're just doing this. And it doesn't matter if you think of, if you're a Paedo Baptist or Credo, and then, 2 years later, it really matters when your elders, I came from a Credo Baptist, and you go, no, I've got to get structure in place. I've got to do all this stuff. And those things are good. But the point of being a leader is to create the structures that allow other people to flourish. So you go, what's going to help these people flourish? And part of the problem I've had with the attractional model that even we run is that, like that movie Free Guy, you don't see what goes on outside the game. I remember praying in church that I was helping out, another church in Perth for a year and a half. On the first Sunday I was there, I prayed about people's work. And someone came up to me in tears. A young woman said, I've never heard my work mentioned in this church before. This church's aim is to get me to bring my friends from work here. It doesn't think about how I need to work. And that says we're myopic, but it also says we don't understand the real world. That her friends probably live 50k at work, probably live 50 k's from this building, and are never going to come here in a pink fit. If they do go to church, it's going to be somewhere 50 k's away, and that's going to cut my heart as the pastor, because I don't want that. I want them to come here. And I think we have to find a way to help people figure that out, and also to help them go, you know what? Life is frantic, and all the messages will tell you that you will be missing out unless you do these 6 different activities and your kids go to all those things and do that, and they're missing out. They'll be left behind. Not to quote the book, I'm just... What you're saying is the good life actually trumps this. The Mindarie Marina life is actually, you can have it. Jesus doesn't say that. But you can't cajole people into that. You must pitch a vision of what the vision of the gospel is. And the gospel story is suffer now, glory later. It just is. And I wonder, can I have the non-suffer now? Can I pay a bit extra and get the non-suffer one? No, it doesn't work that way. Yeah.
A lot of you probably in church leadership, and hearing you saying today about unsettled culture where we're at, to how to outlet the culture, outpurpose the culture. How do we start doing that to help our people think that way in our churches? Few steps we need to take.
I'd say, look, identify the people in your church who will lean into it and just work with a few people. If there's a couple of really hospitable families who go, you know, we've got room at the table for people we don't know who aren't like us, and we will have a meal together once a month. Now, we used to do this. We had a church plant, kind of broke down before we started Providence. But a whole bunch of us, busy though we were with young kids and jobs, every Tuesday, throw food on the table at our house. You come, you have food together, you have quick prayer and Bible. The kids all get chucked in their bath, whatever they need to do, off you go. I'll kick you out in an hour and a half. If you're still here an hour and a half later, I don't want to see you. So I dialed down what was needed and dialed up how frequent. And I felt that worked. And so I want to say is work with a group of people who are willing to do that. Now, at Providence, for example, just disparate groups of people deciding that they would spend time with each other started to filter into the rest of the life of the church. So the young blokes and the old blokes started to get together and they'd occasionally play golf or have a barbecue. Let's just do that. It doesn't need to be promoted as this is the ministry event. It's just the young blokes and the older blokes have decided they're going to get together and have a barbecue. Occasionally they play golf, and you know the old blokes would be the only sport they could beat the young blokes in. By that stage, they weren't playing touch rugby. But also sociologically, unless the gospel really transforms you, you won't want to spend time with people that you don't think are like you. So Derek came to our church with a past, and Derek was nearly 70. He used to play footy in the WA League, and he's about this height, and he spoke like that. It's Derek. And he became a Christian somewhere along the line, but he didn't have a wife and kids around him because he had a past. And the just retired middle income to high income earners blokes group wanted to start a Bible study, or the blokes, on a Monday when everyone else was doing stuff and they weren't. And they said, "Can you help us?" I said, "Oh, okay. You can do it. You know, you're all ex-principals of schools and stuff," but they wanted me to help them. So I helped them. And they said, "What are we going to call ourselves?" I said, "I don't know, the Jesus Geezers. You're a bunch of geezers. Just call yourself the Jesus Geezers." So they called themselves the Jesus Geezers. And they were wealthy enough that they all had the caravan to do the 2 months during winter, and the meals and the nice trips and all those. But Derek wasn't. But they invited Derek in. And it got to be over the course of the year and a half, or the 2 years, that they would never do stuff without Derek getting invited, even though he was very different sociologically to them as well as financially. And one day, and Derek lived in a little one-bedroom unit at the back of Midland, which is a tough area in Perth. And one day, the police came round to Ian's house, who was the guy who led the group. He's one of the elders at Providence, about Derek. And the reason was that Ian's number and one of the other geezers' number had come up on Derek's phone about 8 times. Because everyone was, "Where's Derek gone? I haven't seen him at this, haven't seen him at that, didn't turn up to this." And Derek was dead in his flat for 4 days. And the only people who contacted him ever were the geezers. So that kind of tells you that in the crunch moment, his community were the people who were not like him because of the gospel. At his funeral, his family members did turn up. There was a fight. And there were 60 middle-class young people and older people from the church. And they were looking across and, "How do you know Derek?" And at the graveside, the police were called because the fight got worse. The son of Derek wrote to Jordan, who's the pastor at the time at that church, because I stepped down by that stage, and said, "Thank you for what you did for Dad. I started going to church with my family because of this, and now we're members of a church in the southern suburbs, because we've never seen anything like that." It wasn't sexy. It's just, could you go out of your way and include Derek? Well, the gospel says yes. Nothing else would say yes, because Derek has a past and we don't want his too. I just think some of it's going to be a bit like that, and you have to model it. The people in your setting, they'll do it, because some won't ever do that, and some will, and you just got to keep doing it that way. That doesn't feel like I'm giving you huge strategies, but part of the reason I think we're struggling is because we are in that period of rapid discontinuous change and we don't know where it's going. But don't underestimate that my friend Gillian looks at what we already do and thinks that's pretty high bar. Could I just suggest that? To be encouraged by that? That it's not as if the world is knocking it out of the park when it comes to how to do relationships. I think your job as leaders is you're fine-tuning, you're going around and just fine-tuning. The gospel needs to change this selfishness bit about us, and it needs to change this apathy bit about us, and there's 66 medicines in the medicine cabinet of the gospel, and you're going to, as God's people, lean into what does the church need this year, and where are we going this year, and what is the gospel message what is the implications of the gospel for my people this year? You've got to be on point on that a little bit. You're not just, well, I'm abstract to what my people need because we're going through this book. You go, yes, but at the same time, do I know my people well enough that I go, oh, the gospel speaks into this propensity of my people. Let's teach on that for a year. Let's roll out everything we do that shapes people towards forgiveness or serving. But let's do it from a gospel framework rather than just pure program. Okay.
So having a community at church is part of the strategy. How often do you speak about your missional strategy for a church, but then think about how to engage with unbelievers at work, neighbours, that sort of stuff? Do you train your people up to start thinking this way? Does it affect your preaching? How often do you, the next step, well, some you would have that small community going on.
Yeah.
And then what's the next step to
Yeah.
your people to go and be the ambassadors they're called to be in the public space?
Well, two things. Ollie, go back to my story about Ollie. Two things about Ollie. He had those glasses on. He looked around the room and he knew where people were at. That's EQ as well, right? He's confident in the gospel because he wasn't anxious about losing his job. So there's a je ne sais quoi about that, if you've read Mark Sayer's book, A Non-Anxious Presence. That the Christian in the setting doesn't need the approval of other people, doesn't need to shift blame, doesn't need to steal someone else's praise. So what you're doing is you're equipping your people to be, as the Bible says, that we walk every day in step with the Spirit. The Holy Spirit is within us and we walk in the Spirit. So there's something different about us already that you'd want to believe of a Christian in a secular world. And what you're trying to do to your Christians is to, first of all, say to them, this world that you can see is not all there is. There is an invisible realm. And you walk in that. So first, I want to be able to teach you that there is more going on than you can see. And give you confidence that God will keep you as you share the gospel, as you live a Christian life. But also, you can drip filter things into people's lives and you can use technology well to do that. Where do I find those 15-minute short podcasts? Who do I put them together? Hey, guys, this month, thinking about your work, what does it look like when the boss embarrasses you in front of other people? How do you engage? Do you talk behind his back? Do you raise him out? Do you leave? How did Jesus do it when he was reviled? Well, it tells us in 1 Peter. He didn't revile. He entrusted himself to the one that judges justly. And all you're doing is you're drip filtering those things into people's lives. Because if they are busy, they've got fewer touch points to make with those things, but I think we can use technology well to micro-teach people during the week. If you know how to do it well, or you can find the right resources, micro-teaching, drip filtering it is something we could learn to do better. But as long as we as leaders know that the world out there for people is a little bit different to the sheltered workshop that we're working in. And that's one of the things I want to say. I wrote Being the Bad Guys because people started coming to me saying, have you any idea how hard it is in the university I work in to be known as a Christian, and I've got to be very careful what I say to people? And I went, no, I didn't know. Well, now you know. I can't just invite someone to church. The HR department would get on top of me if I invited someone in a power differential, if they're my subordinate. It would look like, come to my church, you might, or if they heard something by my pastor, which was a throwaway line about something about their personal identity marker, I could lose my job. So in one sense, we need to be as aware of their world in that sense. And that might be a case of just sit down with your people, or once every 2 weeks in your busy schedule, go and have lunch with someone from their work, at their work, or a cafe near them, just to get into the zone that I come into your zone as much as you come into mine. I think that's important. I'm not for burning it all down. I think 20 years ago, we're going to burn it all down and we're going to get rid of our buildings and we're going to do household church. How's that working out for you? It's not. It didn't, because it burned a lot of people out and you lost a lot of buildings, right? Got to keep your buildings. People want to gather somewhere.
Yeah, I was at the 24/7 prayer conference earlier this year. Pete Greig said, and I'm going to fudge the stats because I don't remember it exactly, but something in the realm of 4 out of 5 secular non-believing people would be open to an invitation of going to a church, but only 1 in 5 Christians think that anyone would respond to an invitation just to come along to a church, come to our church services. And I feel like I'm guilty now. I'm like, no one's going to want to come along to my church services or anything like that. But yeah, what's your insights into the...
Well, I don't know the percentages, but I would say this: don't say no for people. Let them say no for themselves. And we're probably in a cultural moment where you might be surprised in that sense. I still think people struggle with church. I'm not sure the stats would be that high. But I do say, don't say no for people. But also, we've got a very movable society at the moment. I'm just rewriting a welcome pack that someone's got for some of their churches for people moving into the neighbourhood in a fairly nice part of Sydney. And the open line on the front of it says, welcome to our neighbourhood. And I said, no. Welcome to your new neighbourhood. Because what welcome to our neighbourhood says is, you come in and mind the rules. This is how it's done. And we don't want that as a suburb, never mind a neighbourhood. That sounds like Wisteria Lane, right? I don't want that. Welcome to your new neighbourhood is the start of a story in their life, because they want change. There is change. And you want to be able to start there, I suppose, in someone's story. So it's even how we word things, that people are sniffing around the edges of this spiritual stuff at the moment. And I'm not saying you lower the bar completely, but you just say, you can come in here and watch what we do, and we don't expect you to fit all the paradigms. And that's something you have to work out with your people. Do you know the thing that will most enable your people not to judge other people who come into your church? Not telling them it. The gospel. That if they are steeped in the gospel enough in their own lives, when someone comes in who's messy, they are not shocked. The most shocked people by sin, by other people's sin, are self-righteous people. A friend of mine destroyed his marriage. He was a Christian. And he said he has an extended Christianized family. And he said the people who helped him and brought him in were the people that previously he'd been annoyed at because they were the really godly, kind, beautiful, Jesus-loving people, and the rest who were a bit hip and cool and urban in their church expression kicked him to the curb. Because the other people got the gospel. Because they're not looking at him going, look at his sin. And I think that's part of the issue, is that we go, these people are messy because I should assume they are. And I am in my sophisticated sins and so my not so sophisticated sins. And so I think in that sense, you've got to help your people figure that out for some messy people. You've got to firewall some messy people away, but you've got to firewall some church curmudgeons away from them as well, right? It's both and. But the gospel is what will soften your people over time to do that. And then you can put the canary in the mine shaft and test whether they do believe the gospel by when someone messy does come in and they ramp up about it. There's something about the gospel we don't get. Not something about how to welcome a visitor we don't get. There's something about the gospel we don't get that doesn't enable us to welcome that person. Yeah. We've got one more question before we all die. Yeah.
One of the things we struggle with in our church, I suppose, is the demographics of how frequently people move now.
Yeah.
We're moving from probably a very stable structural church leadership with families who have generations, or at least decades. And we're getting a lot of new people coming in, a lot of new Christians, which is great. And outside of that sort of classical church culture. And we're even discipling them as well. And so the church is growing, but what we're finding is a lot of people, particularly when they sort of go into the young marrieds and young families sort of stage of life.
Move out. Yeah. No.
And they're moving up the coast and going out west or wherever. And it's just, and so it's sort of, we're in a constant cycle of training and discipleship, but a lot of those people never quite make it right up into senior leadership, if you like. And we're all getting older, and we're losing a lot of our older elders, etc. So it's just created a big gap. So,
what do you do? Yeah. Well, you've got to lean into that a little bit, because you're not going to change the house prices in your suburb, right? That's not going to happen. I think in one sense you put on your sociological glasses and you look around and go, this is the kind of suburb where people are coming at this level and they're leaving at that level. And we just got to, that's where God has us at the moment, and we can train them for that. And if they catch the gospel vision enough, wherever they go, they'll take it with them, just like the Ethiopian eunuch. But that may change how we need to do and structure our leadership. We may need to fast track some people with care into leadership positions and keep a good, tight eye on them, right? And have a 3-year rotation of how, it's a bit like, in one sense, you're a bit like a uni church, except you're at a different stage of life. So that means your church can help this community. It can provide services for people like that, So it could be that we're going to get together and help people figure out how to parent, forget this gentle parenting, we need some Gentile parenting going on, 0 to 5-year-olds. We've got a bunch of people that are in that. How do we help them engage with their non-Christian friends who've got 0 to 5-year-olds, and what can we do? And that's all we're going to do, one thing, and that's okay, But it's, we'll get to the question in a minute, but I think Sydney is a specific beast in that sense. And all inner cities are like that, but Vine Church is like that too, down in Surrey Hills. 3 congregations of all moving in and out. So there's some super rich people that live there, and there's some wealthy people that come in regionally. There's a whole bunch of people that are just churning in and churning out as they have kids. There's a lot of moving parts. But I think big cities are struggling with this issue. Everyone's moving out.
it seems to be escalating.
And it will escalate as the prices go up, I think. Yeah. but it's not cheap anywhere else. It's not. I went out to Bathurst last year and I was like, the price of a house in Bathurst is more than the price of a house in Perth. It's Bathurst. That's Perth, I know, but you know, yeah.
If I could just add on to what's been asked, a question being asked about how do we deal with the transient nature of things. I'm someone who's a beneficiary of a group of elders that have made a plan. So I come from an open brethren church in New Zealand.
You can tell. Sorry, no.
A little rural church, which is very challenging. We've got dairy farmers coming in and going out, so you're always dealing with it, right?
Yep.
The church is now 120 years, and I just want to give you, the Lord has been gracious, and it's the Lord who sustains His church. So let me just preface it by saying that. But we've got a group of elders that don't. So sort of what they've done is they point to your question, how do we do this? Well, the congregation needs to come along. We need to be teaching doctrine. We need to express the importance of doctrine, good doctrine, solid doctrine. What does it mean to preach a God who is immutable in a changing world? A God who doesn't change. Now, we need to protect the pulpit, and so the congregation is to know that, understand that, and feel that. And that's driven from the elders. And then in light of that, okay, so how do we then ensure that we have people to come through, men to come through, and to train and to teach the church and to lead the church? Well, we need to all put our hands in our pockets and congregation and come around us and make this work. And so, in light of myself and my wife, we get sent to study here. Now, that doesn't mean you get sent necessarily to Bible college or whatever. It's a luxury and a great blessing. But there are things that we can do as a congregation, but we all have to come around and say, okay, well, it's important that we can talk well. How are we as a congregation going to work together to make sure that we can help people understand the importance of that? Does that mean that we all come around and sort of put our hands in our pockets and send people away to be trained? Or what can we do here as a church? Can we free up some more money for that sort of thing? But training, I think we have to be way more. I think as leaders, we need to really be pushing our churches, pushing our congregations that this is, we've all got to be involved. It's not just the leader.
Yeah. So what I'd say is the churches run really well in this sense, and when they're very clear about the one or two things they do. Right. So Gordon Ramsay, Mr. Sweary, restaurateur, would go to a restaurant that's failing, and part of the problem that's failing is there's 53 things on the menu, but nothing stood out. And I think in one sense what you want to say is, this is the area we live in, and here's our gospel opportunity. Here's one or two really strong gospel opportunities. And at every level, whether that's sending someone for training, whether that's just equipping the people who work here, or whether that's envisioning that word, the next generation, that's what we'll do. And it could be in the transient model. It's at every level, we know that people are moving on, and we equip people at every level for what life looks like for us, without trying to cover everything that, the shouty voices say we need to do this, we need to do that. And at some levels of leadership, that takes you to be brave and be prepared to lose, for people to push back against you. Say, no, this is how we're going to be able to lead where we are and who we are and where we're going. Now, the Bredos have got a great legacy of money and buildings and mission, right? I'm from Northern Ireland. The Bredos there, they had plenty of money, plenty of vision, plenty of, they were doing it. So we're living off the legacy of some of those people and their buildings and the money, but they had a clear vision about what they were about at that level. Yeah. But I think if we could narrow cast ourselves a little better and look at our area and go, this is the one or two things over the next 10 to 15 years that we could do well. And just stick to that. But you might have to negotiate that with your leadership. And you might just need the support of, where is he? Gav. Look, you've got a network that's got a Gav, right? So, but I don't mean that, I mean that seriously, right? Your network decided that we need to have a focal point about how we're going to move into the next stage of the 21st century. Otherwise, we're dead. We're just legacy. And I think that's an encouragement. So that you're all in this room today, hearing me bang on for 3 hours, is like a miracle. But also, it's because you know that these issues are important. Might be done, Gav. We can have conversations go on, by the way.
If people wanted to know more, like,
Yeah.
do you want to plug some of your books and
Yeah.
what? Yeah.
I haven't mentioned either of them.
I know, come on.
Futureproof and Being the Bad Guys. I'm starting to write a third one, either called Mind the Gap or the Impossible Gap, about the two, I guess, operating systems, the Christian operating system and the secular one, and how we can bridge those two with our message. But also, one of the things I like to do, get cohorts together. We can either do that on Zoom, just charge for an amount for your leaders and you, or even leaders together. If you decide there's 10 of you or 5 of you, you want to do once a month on one topic, one issue. How do we respond to AI? What's a Christian response to that? What are the issues coming up? What should we be reading about it? Those are I sort of kind of put my time aside to do a lot of research on all those issues. But coalescing the ideas that you have and the experiences you've got could be helpful. And I would like to do those every 2 months next year, roll 5 out across the year for a cohort, or just to speak to your own leaders. If you want your leaders to get together and meet with me, I could do that as well. So that's the kind of stuff I do.
Any podcasts you do?
I haven't done any podcasts at the moment, so I'm off the podcast list. But I'm trying to I did have the DeLorean philosophy one, which I enjoyed, but I haven't got back into that. So, but I do drop a few Instagram reels. If you have, someone asked me about those the other day. People actually watch my Instagram reels and say, "What are you wearing today?" And I said, "That's not the point." But so I started doing them in New Zealand in cold weather, and it was all rugged up, walking down these streets, and people were trying to track where I was doing them. So, but just I actually think small drip filtering gospel nuggets into people's lives and finding the right material for your people each week is so beneficial to people who are time poor. Just to drip filter them into the cracks of people's lives is important.
If people want to contact you, how do they
Yep.
do that? Is it your website?
You can website stephenmcalpine.com, humbly named. And there's a bookings page on that, but you can use the bookings page just to email me as well, so it doesn't need to be booking something. Or steve@stephenmcalpine.com. So Steve with a V, Stephen with a PH. Steve@stephenmcalpine.com. Because my friends call me Steve and my mum calls me Stephen, so I had to please, so Steve@stephenmcalpine.com.
Thanks so much for being here, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, yeah.
Thanks for coming today. Really appreciate your time. Go and enjoy lunch, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.